All right, here's a quick video. Pardon the headset mic, but I got to make sure that you guys can hear me on this. I'm going through a couple of things for you that you need to think about when you are putting your interview stuff into your presentation. Because, like I said in class, for at least some of you, some of the hours, it can be done well and it can be done real poorly. And when it gets done real poorly, it turns out to be a big distraction, and it doesn't. It's hard to follow for your audience. So when it comes to using interview answers for a one interview, so you're putting some stuff in from meeting with the principal, from meeting with the dean, from talking to the police officer, and it's stuff that you need to do separately because you're not comparing it to any other answers. You're going to make sure to try and summarize long or less important answers and not go on about them. You don't need to give us the answer word for word. But if it's something that's either more important or you've really hits home with what you're trying to do with your presentation, or they said it was really important, take the time to really highlight that answer and kind of emphasize it. And that may be something where if there was one quotable sentence, then in addition to you telling us what went on in the interview, maybe you decide to flash that one quotation up on the board. If you had some surveys where you had to interview groups, so you had a topic where you had to interview some random adults, you had to interview some random teenagers, you had to interview all teens, and you had like 20 of them, it's important to remember that you're trying to summarize patterns and ranges when it comes to that. So by patterns, like you could look at it as telling us 37% of the group said this was the right idea or the right answer or the best place to go or whatever. But you want to pick out, are there things that you can say, yeah, this is overall what happened in this thing, and these were the three most common answers, or this was the most common answer, or this percentage of people said true or false or this. And then, or looking for ranges, out of out of this answer to this question for Fun City, the vast majority of people came up with these three things, but also included things such as this thing on one extreme and this thing on another. So you're not telling us every single answer that everybody gave, and you're also not putting every single answer on the slides. When you summarize and you're looking for patterns, if there were things that developed as patterns, that's what goes on your slide on the smartboard. The part that was one person said this or one person said that, that's going to make it take too many slides, or it's going to make it really muddled because you're going to have too many things on there. You can tell us, and one person thought this or one person thought that, but it doesn't need to be on your slide because that's clearly not a point you're trying to make. Okay. And you're only going to include individual answers that one person said about, is this good or is this bad, or what can you do, or whatever, if there's a very specific reason you want that specific answer on the presentation, actually on the slide. Okay. Otherwise, you're looking to try and read all of it and see what can I boil this down to where I can summarize it without it being 5, 10 slides worth of info. If you need to make a comparison, either because your project said you're supposed to make a comparison, or you want to compare, well, what was the difference between what adults said and teenagers said, boys said and girls said, or whatever comparisons you want to make, okay, whether it's an individual, what did everybody we ask about the school rules say versus what did the principal say versus what does the rule actually say? So is it an individual to a group? Okay, the police officer said this and all the other people we surveyed said that. Or is it a group to group where it's kids versus adults or boys versus girls? Or is it maybe an individual or groups and comparing that to facts, to the truth? They took this quiz and 50% of them said this was right, and it turns out, oops, it's not right, and here's why, and you back it up with the information. Okay. It's important to put your answers or facts from 1 to 2 topics on a slide. So if I have survey data from a bunch of teenagers that was them taking the quiz for the marijuana project, let's say, I'm not going to put one person's, or that's not a good example. So a better example would be if I have to compare what the adults in CMS thought the school policy was, and the kids in the CMS thought the school policy was, and what Mr. Swenson said the school policy was for if you get caught with alcohol. I'm not going to put all of Mr. Swenson's answers on one slide, and then I'm going to put all of the teenagers' answers on the next slide, and then I'm going to put all of the adults' answers on the next slide. You want to compare answers from one question all on one slide. So I might have 3 bullets on a few slides where it's here was the question, teenagers said, adults said, Mr. Swenson said, and the real policy is this, or whatever the case may be. But you want to make sure it's the topic that you divide the slides up by, not who said it. Because me remembering what Mr. Swenson said 6 slides later, when you get to Mrs. Rochford or whatever, is going to be harder than if you compare them on that slide and then you move to the next topic. So these are a few tips for you as you try to put that data together. If you can put it into a sheet or in some way where you can figure out what the percentages were. Obviously, if it's a true false and you have 15, 20 people who answer, it's pretty easy to do the math on what percentage said true and what percentage said false. But one way or another way to represent interview answers or quizzes you took for you surveyed people on is to put some pie charts together. And that's something that groups that have done a good job with their interview results have used in the past. So on a given slide, I may use a header that says here is what the question was, and then have a pie chart that says out of all of the people who replied, this number of people said true, this number of people said false, or this percentage and that percentage, because it gives it a visual element in addition to the text element. So those are some things to think about when you put your data together out of all of your interviews that you've completed so that you can do a good job of formatting it for the presentation and making it efficient and powerful and professional.